What's going on, family? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Crossroads, the English segment of my Puerto Rican podcast, La Mogolla. Today, I have an interesting and special guest in Fernando Espinoza, correct?
That is correct. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming on, and really interesting story. He's a teacher. Your mother's from Nicaragua. Your father's from Bangladesh. Born in Brooklyn, New York. I saw that you sent me that information, and you know, melting pot of the world. You know, New York City, and now you live in Miami. And he's been kidnapped in Libya. Really, really interesting. I tried to put myself in your shoes. It's impossible as an adult, right? You're traveling the world. You are a huge adventurer, as I read, and and that's great. I admire people like you, but you got kidnapped in one of the most dangerous places in the world. I thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. And once again, thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So tell us a little bit about you before getting into, you know, that huge debacle, right? That huge test that you had to overcome.
So, yeah, as you already mentioned, I was born in Brooklyn. My mother and my father met while they were studying at New York University in the 90s. And then they divorced. And when I was 1 year old, my mother moved to Nicaragua and I went with her. So I spent 4 years of my life as a child from age 1 to age 5 living in Nicaragua. And then afterwards, my mom had already lived in Miami during her childhood. So we already had like some family members living there. So then I was raised in Miami until the age of 18. And, you know, I always kind of had a bit of an adventurous spirit when I was growing up in Miami.
Yeah.
And definitely in the sense that, like, I always wanted to see new things. I wanted to see what else there was outside Miami. And my family did travel with me to an extent, but mostly within the state of Florida and also as well in California and Arizona. And we took one trip to Nicaragua when I was a teenager in high school. But it wasn't until maybe around 5 years after I graduated high school that I really got the international travel bug. So originally, like from 2010 to 2015, age 18 to 23, for me, I was traveling around the US. And though I did love it, it was amazing. It was really, really interesting to see all the diversity that is present in the US. I think I must have traveled to about 30, 35 states during that time. And when I was 23, I took my first trip to Europe. And I spent about 3.5 weeks there the first time. So it was during that time that I became involved in like the humanitarian aid field. So when I was a student at FSCU, I went during one of my winter vacations to volunteer in Greece when the refugee crisis was going on. And it's really weird how all this ties together because it was when I was in Greece that I met an Iraqi Christian Assyrian man who had been living in Norway for the previous 40 years or so. He had escaped from Saddam's rule, and during the crisis, he went to Greece so he could, you know, help out with speaking to some of the refugees that were arriving, since he obviously was a native Arabic speaker.
Okay.
And after that, I stayed in touch with him. And then about 6 months later, during one of my summer vacations at school, I went to Iraq, and he was one of the guides, one of the contacts on the ground that I had, who for the first couple of weeks that I was there, he helped me navigate around the country.
Wow. And what year is this that you're in Iraq?
This is in the summer of 2016. That was my first taste of it.
Okay. Okay. And what is it that you like about traveling, right? You know, people have different reasons on traveling, but you travel a lot, and I guess that you learn a lot as well. I like how you mentioned how you notice the diversity in the US, right? A lot of people don't think about those things. A lot of the things here in this country are, you know, just Latino, black, white, Asian and they don't think about the huge diversity that exists in this country. You know, what things that you notice when it comes to that diversity in the U.S., because it's not mentioned enough?
Well, definitely growing up in a very big city of immigrants like Miami, you see the diversity there. Even
Hmm.
within the Hispanic community, there's like 20 different countries of origin for a lot of the
That's right.
Miami population. The biggest of which is the Cuban population as well. You have other immigrant communities like Haitians, Indians, Syrians, the Arabic communities here as well.
Hmm.
But when I was traveling as an adult for the first time, I got to go to places like and live and work in places like South Carolina and Illinois, Connecticut, Hawaii, and I was able to see like the southern culture in the U.S. as well as northeastern culture, and a mix of like the big city parts of the country and the small towns, middle America. So there, and obviously the U.S. is a country filled with that's entirely populated by immigrants.
Hmm.
So
That's right.
you see how those different immigrant groups have influenced the culture in the cities and the states that they move to.
Yeah, that's right. Especially if they're there for a long period of time. Like
Mhm.
there's places in Texas that people speak German and French to
Right,
this day.
exactly.
So these things are really interesting. Yeah. So how do you arrive to Libya? Do you arrive to Libya from Iraq or from the US?
On that trip, so it's a bit of a funny story. So in 2011, I had planned to travel that entire year. So beginning in January, I took a break from my work and I just started traveling around the few countries that were available to travel into at the time, since this was still during the middle of the COVID pandemic. So I
Hmm.
spent 5 months in Latin America, from Brazil to Paraguay and all of the Central American countries. And it was during that time that I applied for my Nicaraguan citizenship, which I was able to get because I was inspired by a lot of my other friends who travel a lot to get dual citizenship if it's possible for you to get dual citizenship. So I know a lot of my friends from countries like Argentina or New Zealand, Australia, their parents were not from there, so they would apply for citizenship from their parents' countries of birth.
Mm.
So in 2021, I went to Nicaragua with the intention to go and get my citizenship, and I was able to get my passport at the end of it. So after that, I went from Nicaragua back to Miami, spent a couple of weeks there, and then I started traveling around Europe for a couple of weeks, and then I went to Egypt. And it was when I was already in Egypt that I texted this school, which I had already known about them for about 2 years
Yeah.
because one of my former roommates had actually worked at that school in Libya. And one of my French friends that I also met in Iraq, she had also received job advertisements and job postings from them. So I was already like vaguely aware of what I was going to be getting myself into. So it took them about 2 months to reply to my email, but they did eventually get back to me at the end of 2021. I believe it was sometime in September. And we went through the interview and the visa application process. And I was able to get a flight I was actually in Georgia, the country at the time. And then I flew myself back to Egypt. And then I flew from Egypt to Libya. And that's when I started the job there. So it's actually a bit of a weird story because I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew it wasn't going to be a very, you know, fully professional, state of the art institution.
Yeah.
But I had already been teaching in the Middle East for about 4 years prior to that. So I
Okay.
kind of had a understanding of how it worked. There's a little bit of corruption, a little bit of, getting students in from rich and powerful families
Yeah.
who aren't necessarily the most qualified or gifted students, but
Mm.
their parents have the money. So, spoil the rich kids types.
Interesting. And how
So,
how does the process of getting a visa, right, to enter Libya look like?
It
Because
was
that,
actually surprisingly easy for me because I was going on a work visa.
mm,
However, since I'm part of this big traveling community, I know a lot of people who have been to Libya as well, but almost all of them have been there as tourists. With a
okay,
few exceptions, I know, like some oil workers and a few of my friends and colleagues who went there as teachers. So to apply for a work visa is actually pretty straightforward. It can all be done via email, and you just need like a sponsor on the ground. And that can be, like I said, like an educational institution or an oil company.
yeah,
Now, to get there as a tourist is much more complicated and it's super expensive, and it's a very time consuming process because it takes several months, and though you have a tour company that's sponsoring you, you do have to go to the embassy on your own. So you have to find an embassy that's near you. First of all, probably in a capital city somewhere, or a consulate in a smaller city. And then you have to mail your passport in or go there in person, pick up the visa in person, pay all the visa costs and the application fees in person. So I got lucky in that regard, in that it was a very quick and easy, maybe 4 week process.
okay, okay. So you arrived late 2021 to Libya.
Yes, I got there the first week of October. I believe it was October 5th, if I'm not mistaken.
Do you start working immediately or after a while?
Well, this was also one of the red flags of the
Mm,
school, was that I was contacted because the person that they had initially intended to take over during that academic year had actually flaked, and they never showed up.
mm,
And this was in September that they contacted me. Yeah, so the school year was already on the verge of beginning. So then I got there maybe about 3 weeks after the school year had started,
yeah.
because the application process took about a month. And then they gave me a few days just to like get acclimated to a living situation, having like food and washing machines and everything in my accommodation worked out. And
Okay.
then maybe about 4 days later, I began to teach on my own in the classroom. I actually volunteered to shadow some of the other teachers for a few of their lessons, so I just could just get an understanding of their style of teaching, what was expected. And then I worked there for approximately 3 to 4 weeks until we all kind of realized, you know, we knew what was going on. It was really just a way for rich and powerful people to get their children into a quote unquote Western style school.
Okay.
So they, could get the accreditation for that. It'll look good on their record. But like a lot of these kids did not know how to speak English.
Mm,
They came from like business or military or political families.
yeah.
So they didn't really have a lot of respect for anyone who
Mm,
wasn't part of those families. So, and like they really had the full control of the school,
mm,
and the administration and the management really had no power to get these kids to behave in a way that children in school should be behaving.
yeah. And how old are these students?
They were from age, I want to say grade 2 or 3, so probably like age 7 or 8 until grade 12.
Okay. And how would you compare, the environment, right, in that school to Iraq's? How many schools do you teach in Iraq?
I taught at 3 like real high schools, and at 2 just like English centers, mostly
Okay.
for adults and like university students.
Okay. Interesting. And do you talk to the students? Do you speak to these students about yourself, for example, or of your background? Do they understand what Latin America is? How do they perceive this side of the world?
Well, a lot of my students, they weren't particularly interested in like the Latin American aspects. They just kind of saw me as, a U.S. citizen. So
Mm.
they're just like, oh, yeah, here's our American teacher. So they would treat me, same as any other Western teacher that was at the school. But as far as their interest in the Americas, I didn't really see too much of it, with the exception of like some of the 11th graders and 12th graders who were in the process of applying for university in the US.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm just curious about how they perceive us, right? Because I don't know if they take diversity under consideration, or if you're just from the West, that's
Mm.
just a label that they give you, right? I'm not sure. So yeah, interesting stuff, man. And so yeah, so you're working in Libya several weeks, and now you decide to travel and get to know the country, right?
Mm.
Yeah,
Are
that's how it's.
you are you familiar with the app Couchsurfing at all?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I actually, like I said, I was traveling quite extensively for several months before I went to Libya, so still kind of in, traveler mode,
Yeah.
especially me being in a new country that I'd never been to before and that I know has all this amazing Greco-Roman history. So one of these days I went on the app just for fun, and I would, click on Hangouts and
Yeah.
see if there was anybody there. And quite a few occasions, really, it surprised me how many people I actually met on Couchsurfing. And these were Libyans who were quite well traveled. So some of them had been to the US, some of them had been to Japan, Europe, some of the surrounding countries as well, like Turkey, Egypt, Tunisia. So they were quite well traveled. So I met up with a lot of these people. And during the weekends, I would introduce myself. I would say, hey, yeah, I'm teaching here at this school in the city of Tripoli. And then I told them, like, I've read about all of these cool things about Libya, and I'm interested in seeing them. So a few of these people that I met on this app actually did arrange for me to go and visit the Greco-Roman sites near the city of Tripoli in Libya. So the first weekend I was there, I went to with a guy I met on Couchsurfing, and he just so happened to be from a village nearby, one of these towns. So we took a day trip there. It was only about an hour and a half drive. Spent the day there, and then I went to his parents' house, and they made me lunch. And
Okay.
then we went back to the city. And then on another occasion, a couple of weeks later, I invited two of my coworkers to come with me,
Yeah.
and we went and we just spent the night with
Mm.
my couchsurfing friend at a Roman Empire, like Colosseum, like a real like imperial city archaeological site. And like there used to be a very big like tourism investment around that city, even just for internal tourists. So they still had a lot of like the hotel infrastructure and the beachside resorts. They just hadn't been used in like 10 years since
Wow.
the Arab Spring had begun.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, man, as somebody that likes adventures and traveling, you see these sites and you get motivated and you want to meet more, right? More people and see more places.
Right.
I'm curious on how Libyans consider these sites, right?
Yeah, they have a lot of, obviously the ancient religious temples, like temples to Jupiter,
Okay.
temples to Bel, the ancient polytheistic gods and goddesses,
Yeah.
and also, the stereotypical like Roman Colosseums and Greek columns, things like that.
And how do Libyans consider these places? Are some of them proud of this? Do some criticize it because of the colonial power in the past? How is it? Is it mixed?
It is very, very mixed, and it really depends on who you speak to.
Hmm.
Um, like a lot of Libyans that I've met weren't really like super anti-Greek or anti-Roman in a
Yeah.
colonial sense. In recent times, the only powers that have colonized Libya were Italy, and before that, the Ottoman Empire. So there's actually a lot more like like modern Italian and anti-Turkish sentiment rather than against like the Greco-Roman heritage. So multiple governments throughout the past have actually put forth a great effort into preserving these sites. even with the Civil War raging the past 12 years now, they've still gone to great lengths to actually protect it, much more so than in places like Syria and Iraq, where, as I'm sure you know, like 2,000-year-old archaeological sites were blown up and destroyed by a lot of the rebels in those areas.
Interesting stuff, man. So what occurs, man? What happened? You're traveling. Where are you going? When was this, and who snatched you? What happened?
So this is going to be a long, kind of monologue. So if you have questions at all, let me know. I've told this story by now, I should say probably like 40 or 50 times in the past year and a half. So sometimes, I just kind of leave out some details, or I forget that people don't automatically know something.
Yeah.
So it all begins probably like my 4th week there at the very end of October. So I had by this point befriended some of my like British and South African and Canadian friends, colleagues, and befriended them, 2 of which I took with me to the ruins. And we had kind of begun discussing some of the problems that we had been noticing at the school with the lack of proper management and the administration. And then at one point, like, it came down to payday, and they had decided to cut the salaries of a lot of our colleagues for nonsense reasons, and they were like intentionally getting the salaries wrong. And on top of getting the salary incorrect, they would make some random cuts for whatever made up reason. So a lot of us decided, like, we were kind of already angry by that point. So that weekend, I decided to just take a trip with another one of my couch surfing friends that I had met through this app. And total, lack of judgment on my part, I decided to take public transport, which, by this point I had already visited 47 countries. In October of 2021. I had already lived in Iraq for 4 years prior to that, and I'd been traveling the world for about 6 years, almost 6 years at that point. So I was feeling a little bit overconfident in my ability to take care of myself and navigate the world. And I wasn't really thinking, oh, you're in a normal country, Fernando. You're in Libya.
Yeah.
I'd been to Iraq and Sudan already, and I'd been just fine, no problems. A bit.
Sudan is no joke either.
Yeah, especially now.
Yeah,
I was there 2 years ago. It was actually relatively peaceful from there, and I did a lot of hitchhiking, sleeping in the desert with the Bedouins. So definitely not things that I would recommend doing now in July 2023.
Yeah.
So at some point, I decide, since I've already had multiple good experiences on couch surfing so far, being in Libya, I just felt comfortable continuing to use it. So I took a taxi from my accommodation to the terminal in the middle of the city. And then at that terminal, I went and just told them the name of the city that I wanted to go to. It's called Sabha. It's like one of the largest cities in the Sahara Desert region of Libya. It used to be a Saharan caravan town. So that's where my other hosts and my other couchsurfing friends had told me to go to check out this really beautiful oasis in the desert. And the funny thing is that some of them had never actually been to this oasis. They had just heard stories about it or seen things on the internet, or they knew a friend who had been there sometime. So they told me, since you're exploring a lot of the touristic sites here in Libya, you should probably go and check that out too. So they were the ones who put this idea in my head, this Lake Gaborone oasis.
Okay.
So I was already kind of a little bit upset at my school. So I needed to just like blow off some steam that weekend and go see somewhere new and like not want to really be around them. because we were all living in the same accommodation.
Okay.
That's the other thing about working in these international companies in other countries,
Mm-hmm.
is that you have to kind of live and work constantly with your coworkers.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get out of the city for a few days. So I went to the terminal. I told them I want to go to Sabha, and they said, okay, it's like $20 for a ticket in a shared taxi. So I paid it, and I still remember like this weird set of questions they asked me. They're like, oh, by the way, where are you from? So, like I was kind of trying to use a little bit of common sense. I didn't want to reveal to random people on the street that I was an American. So I told them, the obvious thing. Oh, I'm from Bangladesh. I'm Bangladeshi. And they were like, oh, okay, Bangladeshi. At the taxi terminal. And then they didn't check my passport. They didn't check my ID or anything. Which, in hindsight, I'm not really sure whether that would have been better for me or worse for me, because had they checked for my ID and saying that I was American, they probably would have just told me to not go there because it was dangerous, or they would have prevented me from getting in the taxi and just told me to like stay in the city. Yeah. Or something else could have happened. Who knows?
Who knows?
Could have been the opposite.
Yeah.
But so then, since nobody asked any further questions, they probably just assumed that I was like a guest worker from Bangladesh working some like menial labor somewhere in Libya, because there are actually quite a lot of Bangladeshis all over the Middle East, doing like service jobs and like manual labor jobs.
Okay.
So it wouldn't come as a surprise for them to see me there.
Yeah.
Whereas if I were to have said I'm an American, I'm from the U.S., that would have probably sounded some alarms to some people. Which, as both you and I know, it eventually did in the long run. Just not in that immediate moment. So I took this taxi down to the city of Sabha. It's about 700 kilometers, which really is not a great distance. So in my head, I'm still thinking, 700 kilometers, it'll take what, maybe 7 hours, 8 hours to drive it. So it's okay. I'll be there shortly after sunset. Well, unknown to me, that this entire highway that goes straight from north to south down into the desert is surrounded by checkpoints. Like once every like 20 to 30 kilometers, there's some kind of military or government or federal police checkpoint.
Man.
So every single one we go to, we have to wait for at least for the first 2 times, it was like maybe 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
By the time we got to like the third or fourth one, they started asking for IDs. And that's when I had no choice but to pull out the American passport. And then one of my, when the guards at the highway saw that, they were like, they were just kind of a little bit confused as to why I was in a taxi going into the desert, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. Okay. Like, okay, that's kind of weird, but probably has a reason to be here.
How about your Nicaragua passport?
I had that with me too, but I had my Libyan visa and my U.S. passport. But we'll get back to that whole having 2 passports on my person, because that also, in the long run, did not benefit me in any way.
Oh, man.
Especially in a country like Libya.
Okay.
So by the time we get to the third checkpoint, my taxi driver is looking at me and he's like, "What, man, you told me you were from Bangladesh, not from the United States." And we were kind of communicating in broken Arabic, broken English. Like I spoke more Arabic than he spoke English, but it was still very difficult for me to understand the Libyan dialect, and on top of that, like understand like a rural Libyan dialect. So we were having some difficulties communicating. But then it's so weird, because then after a few more of these checkpoints, I can see him beginning to get more and more stressed out. And after some time, he like pulls out like a bag and he starts rolling it up and he starts smoking this. And then he starts looking at me. He's like, "Liu, you're giving me a headache." I have to smoke this to remain relaxed. No.
Yeah. Not lost in translation there, huh?
Yeah.
That miscommunication is crazy, especially in a place like that, you know?
Yeah.
I can't imagine, bro. Jesus. Ooh.
But on top of that, like I already had the contact information of my host who was going to be meeting me in the city of Sabha that
Okay.
night once I arrived. So I kept telling him, like, hey, by the way, like this is his number. If you have any questions or you have any difficulties, just call him. You know, I'm his guest. He's expecting me tonight. So in Islamic society and Arabic cultures, like being a guest is something that's seen as a very like high prestige thing. Like if you're a foreigner in the country and this is your first time there, people will really go out of their way to give you a good first impression.
Okay.
And everybody understands that, so there's this like common understanding, like, oh, like this guy in Libya is hosting this foreigner as a guest in his home.
Okay.
So
it's sacred.
It almost kind of protects you than more than just staying in a hotel, because it gives you an extra layer of, you know, like people that you know in the area and that will go out and fight for you in case anything happens.
Okay.
And that is actually kind of what ended up happening like the day after. So we went, you know, several checkpoints down. It was probably maybe at this point like the 8th or the 9th checkpoint we passed that day. My friend Abdullah is his name, my contact in Sabha, he had told me, by the way, there are some soldiers who are kind of like bandits or pirates on this highway. So give your wallet and your passport to the driver, because if it's with the driver, it's more safe than if it's with you. And at first I didn't want to listen because I was like, no, I feel like I'm getting set up for something. No, I'm not parting ways with all my cash and my only form of identification.
Yeah.
And then eventually he convinced me, okay, like just put it in like the center console. It'll be safe there. Just better than if it were to be on your person. And then at one of these checkpoints, one of these soldiers, he looked very unwell. He had a certain look in his eyes. Like he didn't seem like he was sober in any way. He asked for the IDs, and then, you know, when he sees where I'm from, he opens the back door and he starts like with his hands, like touching me all over, like reaching for my pockets and making like this kind of gesture. And then I was like, no, I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're saying. I just kept saying, I don't understand. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you want. But he looked in like the door handle, and he had a pair of my headphones there, and he just snatched it, and, you know, he grabbed whatever he could. So
no questions asked. They just
no
grabbed
questions asked. He just
leave.
went after it and took it, pocketed it. So, you know, I'm glad that I did actually listen to my friend with that little tidbit of advice. So then, you know, the day goes on. It's checkpoint after checkpoint. Nothing major happens until like just after sunset. We were several hours delayed by this point because of all the checkpoints and all the questionings that we had. And then we pull up to this one like federal intelligence checkpoint, and the sun's already down by this point, and they're kind of questioning us. And then this other truck pulls up, and it's a guy in like traditional Arabic attire. And he's like, okay, come here, please. And so me and my driver and the two other passengers in the taxi get into this truck, and he's like, no, sir, please don't worry. I'm security man. There's nothing to worry about. And then he takes us to his base, where he introduces us to his superior. And then
his base, or is it like a military base, and or is it theirs?
Well, it's like, no, it was like a federal base where they worked.
Okay.
So he takes me to his superior, and then at first they have a very stern look on their face, very, you know, unemotional. and they're just like asking questions like, "Who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing here?" And then like a very quick like 1 or 2 minute, you know, speech. I tell them, "Yeah, my name is Fernando from the U.S. I'm here working for this company. I'm working as an English teacher. I live in this neighborhood in Tripoli." And then all of a sudden, like that, their demeanor changes, and they're all of a sudden become very hospitable. They start offering me cigarettes and tea and milk and dates, and they're just kind of like, that's all of a sudden when the Arabic hospitality comes out. Like they
Okay.
see that I'm a foreigner with good intentions in their country, and they just treated me with the utmost respect. And they were apologizing about the holdup and, being taken by a strange man in his truck in the middle of the night to a military base. And then also, once again, I give him my contact, Abdullah's information, and they're
Yeah.
on the phone speaking, and everything gets resolved. They're like, okay, we understand. And at some point, I guess Abdullah had asked that commander if he felt that it was safe for me to continue on the road to the city, or if he should have like given me an escort or just let me stay there for the night and then my friend could come pick me up. And in hindsight, that probably would have been a good idea to do that
It sounded
because
good.
sorry,
It sounded good.
it sounded good, yeah. And then in hindsight, yeah, that probably would have been the better option. But then I found out later that that checkpoint was actually the very last checkpoint controlled by the federal government. And then there's kind of like a 5 kilometer no man's land. And then the next checkpoint after that is a rebel checkpoint. So I didn't know any of this. Nobody informed me beforehand.
Jesus.
And then, okay, not even the driver, not my contact, nobody at the school, and not even the commanders at the base told me, "Oh yeah, by the way, you're exiting government territory now." So,
And do you think they knew that after a few kilometers you will face these checkpoints, controlled by rebels? Or
I'm sure they knew, because I mean, that's the only other people that are there.
yeah.
I think that they're also a little bit overconfident in how the ceasefire was going to be applied because there was no active fighting there at the time. There was a ceasefire that had been brokered by, I guess, NATO and Russia. And, like, I guess they were just trusting that
Okay.
both sides would behave accordingly and nobody would try to do anything. So, so then me and my driver and the two passengers go on our way. Though I will mention this one thing. So I forgot to mention earlier, one of the passengers was actually from Syria. So he was one of those like guest workers who was there working as, I guess, like a shoemaker or in a tailor shop, he had told me.
Okay.
And the commanders at that last federal base, they were actually very, very rude to him. Like they were yelling at him and like asking him, like, "What are you doing here? Who do you work for? What is your purpose going from Tripoli to Sabha?" And they're like totally like that's one of those instances where you can like literally with your own eyes see racism or passport privilege, because even though we're both foreigners in their country, they're treating me one way, offering me drinks and snacks, and they're treating the other guy like he's a criminal and yelling at him and basically interrogating him. But eventually, I guess they got it all figured out and they let him continue on with us. I guess they didn't really see him as any kind of threat or needing to be questioned any further. Maybe they got in contact with his bosses as well. So then we went on our way, and of course, like 10 minutes after we crossed into the rebel checkpoint, and immediately I noticed that their uniforms are different. These guys' uniforms, they're not wearing like camouflage fatigues, they're wearing like proper, like the dark green dress uniforms. And they have like these red bandanas around their arms, and they have like, sorry, not bandanas, like red armbands, and they have like these red stripes on their covers, on their hats, with like white Arabic script. So, that's one of the things that I immediately notice. And then once again, same as what happened at the last space, a bunch of questioning begins. They look at our IDs, and then they call some other people over in their trucks. And then they say once again, okay, please come with us. We're going to our base. And they take us there, and they take us to an old man, probably like in his mid-50s. He looks like he's like the commander in charge of the group. And then he's like, ironically and most hilariously, he goes up to this guy. He goes up to me, like our group, and I'm the first one that he looks at, and he's like, he says in Arabic, "Oh, this is the guy. This guy, he's from. Where are you from? Were you from Bangladesh?" And I pretended that I didn't understand. I'm like, "Huh?" And then he like mockingly says, "Huh?" I'm like, "Okay." So then obviously they start looking at my IDs. They see my Nicaraguan passport and my American passport, and they see that I have been traveling for quite a long time by this point. So I have multiple different kinds of cash as souvenirs, and then I have 2 cell phones, and then I have a bunch of SIM cards from like 7 different countries that I've traveled to in the past 4 months. And then I can immediately see like the gears turning in their head.
Yeah, my perception, like I've never been in this part of the world, right?
Right.
But that reminds me of spy movies,
I'm sure that's definitely one of the reasons why this became an international incident. That's kind of like a rookie mistake on my part. When I'm traveling, I'm kind of just thinking about, ease of communication. So I'm just like buying cheap little $5 SIM cards in the countries I go to, and then just not throwing them away and keeping them in my wallet.
Yeah.
And then I have like little souvenirs, like maybe $2 or $3 worth in cash. And of course, I'm not going to think of anything of it because, it's just like $2 or $3 for souvenir purposes. Yeah. But then people in military groups in some of these countries would automatically assume suspicious behavior with, SIM cards and the phones and the passports and the cash, even though it's not in large amounts at all. Mm-hmm. So then, after all that, they empty out my backpack that I had with me. They take everything piece by piece and they lay it out on the table, and they bring out a document, and they're like listing everything one by one, like, U.S. citizen Fernando Espinoza was taken to this base today. On his person, there were 2 passports, 2 cell phones, such and such amount of money from this country, and there's like a long list of like 7. Same thing with the SIM cards, and then they wanted me to sign it. I'm like, why? And then at this point, I'm pretending that I don't really speak Arabic, even though I can kind of make out what they have written on the paper.
Okay.
And then I tell them, no, I'm not going to sign that unless you give it to me in English. Give me a document in English, and then I will sign it. And then eventually they're like, okay, whatever. So then they take us to yet another base, and they separate the 4 of us now. I think they put the 3 guys in one room together, my driver and the 2 passengers, and then they put me in another room on the second floor, locked, and there were like bars on the window. And so, yeah, but then like they were like also very confused and like in a almost childish and innocent kind of way. Like they didn't know what to do with me, so they didn't know whether to be rude or to be polite to me. So, by the way, it's like 3 a.m. by this point. We've been on the road for 14 hours.
Oh my God.
Like 16 hours now. We had left at 11 a.m. And we're just kind of there in like one of the common rooms, me by myself with like these 5 military officers, rebels, mind you, all around me. And they're just like, they're with me and my luggage, and we're looking through all my stuff. I'm looking through my stuff now to make sure nothing's been stolen. And then I all of a sudden become aware that some of my cash is missing, my Libyan money. So it was like 1,000 Libyan dinars, which equates to like $200. So not an insignificant amount, especially by Libyan standards, which is probably close to a month's salary there. So it's a significant amount. So
Yeah.
then I notify them. I notify like one of the guys I can kind of tell is like one of the higher ranking ones. And I'm like, hey, like my money is missing. Like some of my money is missing. I had a stack of 1,000 here and now it's not here. So then he's like, oh, okay. All right. He actually like began to look worried. He's like, let me get that taken care of right now. But then it's like, these guys are on duty. It's like 3 in the morning, and then eventually I'm sure some of them got woken up to deal with me, the issue that they had going on. So then they're just like, okay, we're gonna put you in this room, just go to sleep. If you need anything, just knock on the door and I'll be right outside and I'll unlock the door if you need to go to the bathroom or whatever.
How do you feel at this moment? Do you feel kidnapped, or do you feel like this is going to be a long checkpoint scenario? Are you completely worried at the moment, or do you see what's going through your head?
At that point, I could kind of see that, you have to like read people when you're traveling. Based on the way they were acting, I could kind of tell that they weren't being malicious. They were just genuinely confused, as was everybody in that situation. And at that point, like when he shut the door behind me, like for like a few seconds, I was in my head thinking like, "Oh my God, Fernando, you've really done it now. What have you gotten yourself into?" But I wasn't like in full panic mode yet, specifically based on their behavior. So I was like, okay, you know what? There's nothing I can do right now. I'm in a military base surrounded by men with guns.
Exactly.
And once again, mind you, I don't know at this time that these guys are rebels. I still think that they're like federal military police or military soldiers. I didn't know until the next day that these guys
even though you know the difference in the uniforms, right? And the red stripes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like everything, like they still looked very official. In fact, they were actually better dressed than the official military army soldiers of Libya. So that's, based on all of that, I wasn't really that worried. And then, once again, there's nothing I can do. So I just decided to just like shut off. I decided there's no use in panicking. So I'm just not going to. And I just told myself I'm going to go to sleep. And then when another opportunity arises for me to speak to someone and rectify this situation, I'll get to it. But I'm not going to cross that bridge until I get there. And I kid you not, that is one of the best nights of sleep I've ever had in my life. I slept like a baby. Partially because I think I was in such shock at what was happening. I just like shut off. I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to deal with the situation that I'm in right now. I'm just going to try to rest and save my energy for later.
And 16 hours of a road trip, bro. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an extremely long day. So I was exhausted on top of all that. So yeah. So then I probably got a good maybe 5 or 6 hours of sleep that night. And then at some point in the morning, like some guys come in, and I think it was probably like a switching of the guard thing. Probably like one of the guards that was relieving the guard that was on duty when I showed up was just kind of told that, oh, by the way, there's an American in this jail cell, just so you know. So he just came in like with disbelief in his eyes, and he looked at me. He had a rifle with him, and he's like, "Oh, wow, okay." And then he just walked away. And then like an hour later, another group came, and they're like, "Okay, all right, let's get down to business." So they were very nice. They let me use the bathroom. They offered me breakfast or like coffee, teas, or anything you'd like. Would you like some cigarettes? And then I said yes to all of those things. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, let's get started. And once again, broken Arabic, and we're really trying our best to communicate with each other, even using Google Translate on their phones, because they had also taken my wallet and my phones from me. I had nothing with me. Like all of my luggage, all of my belongings had been stored in another room. So then when that morning when we were doing this meeting, this questioning, they're just kind of like, once again, trying to figure out what happened. Why are you here? How did you end up here? And I keep telling them, like, same thing I told them before at the previous base. I'm teaching. And, then, I decided to come down to this oasis in the desert. And I keep playing out this oasis. And they're like, oh, yes, the oasis. Yes. We know what you're talking about. Okay. All right. So then that kind of like put them at ease a little bit. And I'm kind of dragging this part of the story out a little bit. So I'll try to speed it up because we haven't even gotten to the juicy part yet.
Oh, my God.
So, so eventually, we go through it, but there's only so much that can be done. So then, good news is my cash was returned to me. That higher ranking lieutenant did find the guy who had taken my cash, gotten it back, and he gave it all back. Not a single bill was missing.
Interesting.
Everything was returned in full.
Okay.
So then, the full day goes by. I have breakfast and lunch. And, I'm just kind of there with the guards hanging out, like, watching, like, videos on YouTube, Google translating, talking about each other. He's like, oh, you're like, where are you from? Oh, I tell him I'm from Miami. I ask him, where are you from? He's like, I'm from Benghazi. And he's like, hey, let me show you some pictures of my hometown, since it seems like you like traveling. So he starts showing me these, like, beautiful forests around the city of Benghazi.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, this is where I'm from. You should go visit one day. And then eventually, like, I asked him, like, man, I'm getting kind of bored of being in this room all day. Could we go out into the parking lot and, like, take a walk in the sun? And at first he says, no, I'm sorry. That's not allowed. I can't do that. And then maybe like 20 minutes later, he comes back and he's like, yeah, come on. Let's go to the parking lot. Let's take a walk. And then he gives me some cigarettes and we're just there hanging out. Like, it's honestly like a very chill experience.
So these folks have value, they have values. They're friendly, they don't sound like rebels or terrorists or anything like that to me, how you're describing them,
Right. They're very gentlemanly, realistic, like in almost like a medieval knight kind of chivalry that they present themselves with.
Okay.
And so then the day goes by, we go back inside, and around, I want to say maybe 6 o'clock in the evening, the old man that I had seen at nighttime at the base the night before comes over, and he has with him an 18-year-old. And this 18-year-old speaks perfect English, immaculate. So he comes up to me, and the first thing he does is he apologizes, like, all right, Mr. Fernando, I'm very sorry I got here so late. I had some business to take care of earlier this morning, but they called me here so I could facilitate the translation of this conversation. So then we get down to it. He's like, who are you? Why are you here? Who are you working for? Are you in Libya legally? Do you have a visa? And, I tell him everything. And then the whole thing lasts maybe like 30 minutes. And once again, they call my friend Abdullah, my contact in Sabha. Once again, everything gets resolved. And, at first they were like a little paranoid. They're like, how do you know this guy? Where did you meet him? And I just told him I met him on Couchsurfing. It's like a traveler's app. That's what we use to meet people in new countries.
In question, can you hear your friend speaking to them?
Yes.
How does he sound?
He sounded very angry.
Angry? Okay.
Yeah, he was very, very upset that they had taken me and were essentially holding me in custody for almost an entire day.
Okay.
And like later on, he told me some things that he had said, but we'll get to that later. But at the time, we're kind of just speaking to each other through the translators, and I can hear them speaking to each other as well. And then after the 18-year-old translator comes over and kind of clarifies everything, they get on the phone with them again, and they're like, hey, yeah, meet us in the city center in like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then they're like, okay, like, here's all your luggage. I checked to make sure nothing missing, and I kid you not a single thing of mine was missing. And then I get into a military vehicle, like a Humvee kind of thing, and they take me from their base, quick 20-minute ride to the city center of Sao Paulo. So this base was like right outside the city.
Question.
Yeah.
Where's the driver?
Oh, yes. Good. Glad you reminded me. See, this is some of the details that I forget to mention sometimes.
Yeah.
As they're taking me out, actually, it was before that. It was when I was getting interrogated. I see my driver come in, and like they're kind of speaking to each other in a local dialect. Didn't really understand, but the driver seemed kind of pissed too. So the fact that he's looking angry and not scared was a good sign for me.
Yes.
Because it seems like they're not like doing anything to him. They're not planning on doing anything to him. So then we all went out together and with the two passengers as well, and we went to the city center, and I see like down this main street. It's a small town of like 70,000 people. On the main street, you can just see on both sides of the road, there's just like cars lined up everywhere. And then we see this one white car in particular. And then this is my first time meeting this guy, of course. So it's my friend, Abdullah. We pull up right beside him. And then I have the two military officers with me. And then my driver is in the taxi following him behind. So then, I have it was the lieutenant who had returned my cash to me, and the 18-year-old translator were with me. And I asked him if I could take a selfie with them, and the older guy refused, but the 18-year-old was like, "Yeah, sure, why not? Let's take a selfie for memory's sake." And I still have that picture to this day.
Awesome.
And I'm wearing like an Inter Milan football jersey, and this 18-year-old soldier is just smiling right next to me. And then my friend Abdullah comes up. They speak to each other briefly, and then we're like, "Okay, Fernando, don't worry. It's nice to finally meet you. Everything's gonna get resolved right now." And then I can see like the older soldier kind of getting a bit worried. He's like looking around, and he tells the 18-year-old, he's like, "Okay, we gotta get out of here. Let's go right now."
And how long did Abdullah, your friend, drive to meet you where you were?
Not very far. It was maybe 5 to 10 minutes from his home.
Okay, so you're actually close to your destination.
Yes.
Okay.
So this was the last checkpoint, the last hurdle of all the ones that I needed to get through to get to the oasis. Okay. So then we part ways. The military guys go, and then Mohammed he informs me that all these people on the side of the streets are all of his cousins that he had brought along to meet me and to oversee this exchange happen. And I don't know if this is true, but he told me this later. He's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, all my cousins had AK-47s in their cars, just in case anything happened."
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, because you talk about them being fearless, and you talk about them being mad, right? Mm-hmm. They must back it up with something. Can you imagine you in a crossfire?
Oh my God, I wouldn't want to.
Oh my God.
So then, this is where it gets interesting. So we get into the car. It's my friend Abdullah's cousins driving, and his other cousins in the front seat, and then we're both in the back seat. And then he makes this very, very crude joke, which I very much appreciated, but it was just not the right time. He looks over to me and he says, "All right, Fernando, now's the time when you get kidnapped."
Oh my God. Some dark comedy.
Dark comedy. He's like, and immediately I was like, "Ah, that's really funny. I appreciate it, but not a good time to make that joke."
Jeez.
And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm just joking." So anyway, we're gonna go to my house. It's at my parents' house. We have some dinner there waiting for you. Sorry, about all these troubles, but we got everything smoothed over. Everything's gonna be fine, and then we're gonna go to the oasis at some point.
Awesome.
So mind you, it's been like 36 hours by now, like a full day and a half, and I still haven't seen what I went to see in the city, and the weekend's pretty much over by this point.
Yeah.
So I told them, "Okay, well, I'm already here. And he asked me, okay, so are you wanting to cancel your vacation or do you want to continue? And I'm like, of course I want to continue. I just spent 24 hours, almost 24 hours in a jail cell, and I'm definitely going to go to this oasis now. I'm not going to come all this way and go back with my tail between my legs.
Exactly.
So
If you went through all that mess, right? Through hell. I can't, obviously, I don't know what type of hell you went through afterwards, but that's a lot to deal with. That's a handful, right? How were the conditions in that jail cell?
In that one, not too bad. I mean, like the walls were clean, the floor was clean. It was a little bit dusty and sandy, but it's in the Libyan desert, so of course it's going to be. But overall, it was actually pretty clean, relatively speaking. Like there weren't any stains or anything on the walls. There weren't rats or rodents. It was fine.
Okay, about the bathrooms, because you mentioned at least they let you go to the bathroom.
They were okay. Normal Middle Eastern bathrooms.
Okay.
So then the next day, we spend the full day just like, I'm still upset with my job at this point. So I'm just like, okay, I'm not even going to think about that. A bit irresponsible on my part as well. But, what was I going to do? I was in a city 700 kilometers away that it took me 36 hours to get to. Like, there's not much. Even if I wanted to go back, it's going to take me a long time to get back there anyway. Exactly. So we just do a full city tour of Sabha that first day. And we go looking around at first for like touristic things, like a tour company that was operating there, but mostly for locals now. But they did do tours to the desert, and they had like 4-wheel drive SUVs and Jeeps at the tourism company. So then we're like, okay, so let's decide tomorrow in the evening, let's go to the oasis. So we do that, full day goes by. And then the next day, he's treating me very nicely the whole time. We were just he's introducing me to his uncles and his cousins who own like jewelry shops in the city. His mom is making me food all, 3 times a day. And then we go to the grocery store and we buy some like food for the kebab and the camel that we were going to cook in the oasis that night. So
they eat camel?
Yeah.
I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, it's very tasty.
It's tasty?
Yeah.
How does it taste?
It's almost like chicken, but like chewier.
Okay.
And so then we get all these supplies. We get like cucumbers, tomatoes, onions, camel meats, cow meat, and then we take it with us to the desert. I pay the guy, of course. I pay my driver, who's the guy from the tourism company who's employed, using his own SUV for these excursions. And then we go to the oasis. We get there a little bit after sunset, and then we can see actually other local tourists from other cities and, with their SUVs parked nearby as well. So then we start a fire. We do like a little campfire in the sand, and him and 2 of his cousins are preparing the food. And then, we eat that, we smoke some cigarettes, and then I think he also had a hookah as well, and then we go to sleep. And the next day, during sunrise, we go with the SUV all around this oasis, and we go, we took a shovel and we dug into the sand, and we could see like water seeping out. And then we put our swimming trunks on, and we went into the lake. It's a super salty lake. I don't know if you've ever been to a lake or a body of water with a high salinity, but
no.
They have therapeutic effects as well, especially for people with skin diseases.
Okay.
So a lot of these people that were going to this lake as tourists were going there for like medical tourism to cure their like I don't know what it's called, like psoriasis or other skin conditions.
Okay.
And then we introduced each other. We told each other why we were here, where we're from. They thought it was cool that an American tourist was in their oasis. I was like the first foreigner they'd seen in more than 10 years, probably. So it was very interesting for them. And then later that night, we, we went back to the city. And then, now that I had accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish, I started thinking like, okay, I should probably start planning to get back to work and, get back to the city that I'm living in. And even though I figured by that point, like, I know there's not going to be much of a chance of me continuing with this employment contract at this institution, since, it seems a lot of my colleagues and I weren't particularly enjoying our time there. And also, another fact, while I was in Sabha, I actually found out that one of my British colleagues had gone to Turkey and then submitted her resignation letter while she was there. She had actually told them that she was going to come back, and then she just decided not to.
Mm.
So that influenced my decision, of course.
Yeah.
So then the day after we got back from the Oasis, we went to a lot of flights, airline offices, and we were just looking to see if there was any way for me to just take a cheap $100 flight from Sabha back to the capital. It would have been a 1 hour, maybe hour and a half flight. So there were airlines that were running, but a lot of the tickets were booked out 2 weeks in advance. So then I asked my friend if he could try to find a way to get me back to the capital by land. So we were kind of brainstorming several options for me to not get picked up by another random group of rebels on the highway again.
Yeah.
And then eventually, finally, the next day.
And that's the only highway you can take to go back, right?
There's only one highway. Yeah, it's the only one.
Yeah. Go back through the same route.
Yeah, just walk through the minefield, and I gotta walk back in the same direction.
Okay.
So then eventually, on the 5th day, he was actually able to get me a seat on an airplane. I don't know how he did it, but everybody in these Arabic families are very well connected. Even if it's not somebody from the immediate family, it'll be a distant second or third cousin who will help you out. So I think one of his cousins pulled some strings and just managed to get me a seat on one of the flights.
Awesome.
And so then on the day after, the 6th day, so I've been gone on almost a week at this point, I finally get my flight. I give them my passport, they can see the visa in there. And then, I paid my friend for the ticket. And then we parted ways, and that was the last time I saw him in person. And then, this is when the real adventure begins. So I land in Tripoli airport, and, it's one of those kind of very primitive looking airports where it's actually not even the main airport in Tripoli, because the main airport has been essentially unused for the past 7 years because of all the fighting that's been going on.
Yeah.
So you can still see bombed out airplanes on the runway. Wow. So we're using one of the secondary airports. So we get there. It's one of those airports where you just kind of walk from the airplane down the stairs and across the tarmac to the terminal.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I enter that building, I see people getting in a line. They're showing their IDs, and then I have my American passport in my hand. And before I even get to where it's my turn to get called up to the desk, some guy in a black uniform comes up, snatches my passport out of my hand, and he's like, "You come with me." I'm like, "Okay." And then he's leading the way. I'm behind them. I bypass all the others through this line, and then he takes me to the outer area of the terminal, going outside the airport and into the arrivals section.
Mm-hmm.
And then he instructs me, okay, go get in that truck over there. And at this point, I'm calling my contact at the school who was supposed to pick me up. So then he gives my passport to another officer, and then he gives it to the drivers of this truck. And then I'm like, okay, I'm calling my contact at the school. I'm asking him hey, did you send these guys to come pick me up? And I'm calling him multiple times on WhatsApp, and then my regular SIM card. And like 3 times, he didn't answer.
Do you think they were expecting you?
No, I'm sure they were expecting me.
They were expecting you. Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody called from the checkpoint. Somebody called when you arrived, right?
Yeah.
And let them know. I mean, there's no other way.
Somebody let somebody know. Who knows?
Yeah.
But there were people there in uniform expecting me.
Okay.
So then I get in, these guys, they have AK-47s, of course. They're very well armed. And then, they put my luggage in the back of the truck, and then they put me in the rear passenger seat. So, there's not much I can do when there's 2 guys with AK-47s telling me to get inside a truck. Exactly. So I just complied. And also, this is like in the middle of the afternoon, like 12:30 in the middle of the day, in the middle of the city, in a busy airport, that this is happening. So then these guys, they're just kind of being very chill as well. And we're just driving, like, I'm just there hanging out in the back seat. And, then, like, I still have my, like, things in my pocket. So I pull out my phone, and then I send this guy, the guy from the school, I send them, like, a live location, and I set it for 8 hours. Because I kind of started getting weird vibes from these guys because they weren't talking very much. So then these guys see me, like, playing around on my phone, and that kind of agitates them a bit. And they're like, no, give me your phone, give me your phone. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you my phone. So then I, I sat on it, and I told them, like, no, I'm not going to give it to you. And then, then they started getting, like, a little bit handsy, a little bit aggressive, and they were just kind of, like grabbing me by the shoulder, like, very firmly. They're like, give us your phone. Like, we're not joking. And then they start, like, putting their hands through my pockets, like, reaching for my wallet, and then, like, reaching across me to get to my phone. And then, eventually they get it, but I have a password on my phone where you can't turn it off unless you put the password in.
Okay.
So they were trying to turn the phone off, and they couldn't. And they told me to put the password. I said, no, I'm not going to put the password in there. And then, then they started, like, kind of, like, we were both trying very hard to not fight each other. Okay. Like, we were both actively trying to, like, de-escalate the situation. And, like, we were both kind of, like, really just, like pushing our hands towards each other, like just trying to, like, push each other away, like, not actively trying to fight each other. Because, none of us wanted that outcome. So then these guys, I just complied because they're like, resisting is only going to make it worse. And I'm already in the car with them. So
yeah,
how effectively am I actually going to be able to resist anyway? So then I'm just like, okay. And then this is where it gets a bit comedic at their, like, the primitiveness of Libyan government officials. Like, they put like a COVID N95 mask over my eyes, and they were using that as a blindfold. And they're like, okay, like, don't look out the window, just give us everything that's in your pockets, and then just sit there and be quiet. And I'm like, okay. Or I'm kind of like trying to, like, peek through the sides of the mask, but they're like, no, just look down. So after, like, a 15-minute ride, we get to where I'm supposed to be. It's some sort of facility, and they take me out. They put me, like, in the corner of a room, and I'm just standing there for what seems like half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And then, like, I can hear people next to me, and then, like, I'm just kind of, like, motioning to the guard, like, hey, psst, like, hey, can I have a cigarette? Like, you guys are, like, really stressing me out right now. Like, you're blindfolding me and taking me to strange places. Can you just give me a cigarette to, like, relieve my anxiety a bit? And they're like, no, I'm not going to give you a cigarette. And I'm like, okay. So then, in a case of deja vu, what happens is they finally take the mask off. They take me to another room, and I see my same backpack. Everything, same exact thing that happened before. Everything's laid out on the table. All my cash, all my SIM cards, all my phones, all my passports. And same kind of document. They list everything that I have with me.
Okay. Are these officials from the federal government, or are these officials from the rebel side?
So this is in the capital. So these are federal
Okay.
And I use that term loosely. Federal government officials,
Okay.
or on the periphery of that, government apparatus.
Yeah.
Whether they may be officially employed by the government or not is debatable. So then, once again, they want me to sign it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to sign it unless you give it to me in English. And then they're like, okay, all right, whatever. So then they just take me to a jail cell and they put me in there. And once again, they lock the door behind. And once again, I'm thinking, same exact thought. Oh, Fernando, you really did it this time. You thought you got out easy, but no, you're not. You're not out of the woods yet.
Jesus.
And then I'm in there for like 2 hours, just like pondering life. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? Everything's going to be okay, but how am I going to make it okay? How am I going to resolve this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And then after 2 hours, mind you, it's like maybe 3 o'clock at this point. I get, the door unlocked, and these two guys, once again, they put the COVID mask over my eyes, and they take me to another room. And once again, they have me walk into the room, and I'm facing the wall, and then behind me, I hear two people, two old men, probably, judging by the sounds of their voices, they're probably in their 50s or 60s. And, I can hear one of them. He speaks okay English, but kind of broken English. Not the best grammar or vocabulary, and not the best understanding of English, like understanding of spoken English.
Yeah.
So that alone worries me, because this guy's in charge of my interrogation papers. So then they start interrogating me, and it's just like, goes on for 5 hours. It's just question after question after question. They're like, what are you doing here? And I tell them, and then they're like, okay, but like, what are you really doing here? Like, you're not a teacher. Like, why are you actually here? Like, just tell us. Like, who really sent you? Like, who are you really working for? You're not working for this English school. Like, who are you really working for? And then they start asking me about my travels, and I tell them, like, no, I'm just a traveler. I like to take videos and get a lot of cool footage from the the countries that I travel to.
Yeah. So
that's why I've been going to these Greco-Roman sites and seeing all the temples and the Colosseums. That's why I went to the Oasis. That's why I was taking videos of the beautiful nature out there in the Sahara Desert. And they're like, no. Like, tell us about your travels. List all the countries you've been to. I'm like, okay, get ready. It's a kind of a long list, okay? And then it takes several minutes for me to go through the list. And then they're like, okay, but have you ever been to Jerusalem? Have you ever been to Israel? Have you ever been to Syria? Have you ever been to Afghanistan? And then they get to the question, have you ever been to Iraq? And I'm like, yes, I have. But I was there for work. Like, not the kind of work you're thinking. Like,
yeah.
I was there doing humanitarian work and English teaching. And then once again, they wanted me to list every single place I ever worked at, like the names of my bosses. Even on my previous vacation, they wanted me to list like the names of the hotels that I stayed at, the names of the people I was hanging out with. And realistically, I do have quite good memory for some of those countries. It was actually quite easy for me to give that information. And once again, this is one of those things where I'm not sure if it helped or hurt, because how concisely I was giving the answers, that may have made it seem like something that was rehearsed or memorized.
Exactly.
Rather than like me just having good memory and like actually remembering all of these things.
And maybe they're not used to people. Maybe they're not used to diversity, and seeing people from the U.S., for example, maybe a teacher that has traveled all these countries. There's something going on. I could see why they would think that way, but
of course,
God damn it, man,
Yeah, and I mean, I understand where they're coming from as well.
Yeah.
Still doesn't excuse what they did to me, but it's important to understand like the culture and the societies, especially given the current circumstances that these people are coming from.
Exactly.
So then, that interrogation goes on for 5 hours, and they're asking me everything about my life, like about my parents, about my cousins, where my family members went to school, where I went to school, what I studied, the names of all my friends, where I've worked, like the names of my bosses. So it's just unbelievable. Like every aspect of my life, they wanted to know
That's
about.
tough. That's tough.
Yeah. So, and they even wanted me to tell them my home address. And I'm like, uh, no, I'm not going to tell you where my parents live. You're out of your mind if you think I'm going to give that information up to you.
Yeah.
And I kind of laughed at them, and they got a little bit irritated at that. And one of the guards went up and he like hit me upside the head.
Oh,
And I'm
man.
like, but not once again, not in like I'm trying to hurt you badly kind of way, just like be respectful kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
He was trying to sun you.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Man.
So this goes on for 5 hours. By the time we get finished, the sun has set. And then they're like, okay, all right, it's Mr. Fernando. This has all been a very big misunderstanding. We're going to get this all resolved. And, tomorrow, it's already 8 o'clock now. It's nighttime. Tomorrow, we'll talk to our big boss. We'll take this up to him, and then you'll be out of here by sometime in the afternoon tomorrow. All you have to do is sign this paper. And I'm like, no. Give it to me in English, and I'll sign it. And then we get into this huge argument about me signing this paper. I'm like, no, I'm not going to sign it. Like, I can read some Arabic, but I can't understand your Libyan dialect. And on top of that, I can't understand your handwriting. So no, I'm not going to sign that. And it must have gone on for like 30 minutes. And they keep going on back and forth. Oh, Mr. Fernando, come on. We are good, honest Muslims. We would never lie. Allah is looking down at us. Everything that's written on this page is 100% the truth. Yeah. So on top of that, I don't even know, even if you were telling the truth, I'm not going to sign it. I don't even know if you are lying or not.
Exactly.
So then eventually we came to like some compromise. I was like, okay, I'm not going to put my signature on this, but I'll get my pen and I'll make some like scribbles that kind of sort of looks like my initials.
Contracts could be used in so many ways, you know, and to trick you or to make you do certain things, obviously. But in this case, like, they haven't even told you what they want to do with you.
Yeah.
And then the problem is that they don't know enough English to translate it.
Yeah.
Man, this is tough, bro. This could have gone south worse than what it did, right?
Yeah, in so many ways, in so many different
ways. In so many ways.
Like, this really was one of the best case scenarios, what happened to me.
Yeah.
So then, like, eventually, like, I put like little, like, really badly written scribbles, like FE, but like a very bad handwriting. So like, even if they wanted to trace it back to me, they realistically couldn't.
Yeah.
I could just say, oh, those are just scribbles on a piece of paper. So then, the next day comes and goes. I wait for them all day. Nothing happens. So then,
and you're locked in.
I'm locked in. I'm in a jail cell now. Like, probably like 6 foot by 10 foot, like, cell, like just big enough for like maybe 2 twin mattresses to be like side by side next to each other.
Okay.
So there was actually a bed frame with a mattress there, but the bed frame was broken. So I had to pull the mat off and just put it on the floor.
Okay. Good idea.
So then, the next day comes, I get breakfast, then, 3 hours of nothing, then I get lunch, then like 5 hours of nothing, and then I get dinner. And then I'm just, every time I'm talking to the guards, like, man, I'm telling them in my broken Arabic, like, there's been a huge misunderstanding. I need to go talk to your boss, like, right now. So this goes on multiple times over the next few weeks. And every single time I'm telling them, like, can you just, like, call somebody? Like,
hold on a minute. You were talking about hours, and now it's weeks.
Yeah.
How long were you there for, man?
47 days.
47 days. Holy fucking shit. And the same cell.
So it actually did get better. So The second day came and went, and nothing eventful happened. Now the third day was quite an eventful day. So on that day, I think it was for breakfast, probably like 8 or 9 in the morning, shortly after a few hours after the first call to prayer. So, I was in there so long, and I was kind of memorizing like the times of the call to prayer and how many minutes from like the second call to prayer, breakfast would come afterwards, how many minutes after the fourth call to prayer, then immediately after that would be dinner and that sort of thing. So then the third day during breakfast, a guy comes and he speaks to me in Arabic at first. And he's like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "America." And then immediately he switches to English. He's like, "Oh, you're from America. Wow." And then immediately I'm like, "Yes, oh my God, you speak English. Thank God." Because all the other guards there spoke Arabic only.
And
so then I begin speaking to this guy. I'm like, "Hey, listen, can you please tell me that I can go talk to your boss today, or one of you guys can call my boss?" And then I told him, so I was in the jail cell, so I had to like really use the restroom that morning because they had locked me in there like maybe 10 or 12 hours.
Do you always look at the cup half full?
I mean, I try to be optimistic as much as I can.
yeah, because I notice how the optimism comes out every time you see an obstacle, right? And, so I'm like, man, this guy's positive. A lot of people would have lost it, man. A lot of people
that's actually my blood type too. My blood type is B positive.
B positive. Oh man, well, man, and I can imagine a roller coaster in your mind, right? Did you get in a bad mood? What was your darkest time, right? Like mentally speaking, did you think about doing anything crazy, or you always maintain, composure and level-headed?
I mean, there wasn't like any one major incident that it was like a particularly dark time, but like I was crying a lot when I was in there, and like even it sounds silly to say it now, but even when I was in there, I would like purposely position myself in front of the camera, and like I was already crying to begin with, and then I would like move to the camera just so that they could see. I don't know, maybe that would trigger some human element in their heart.
Okay.
But no, like I cried a lot. I've never cried more ever in my life during any short period of time than when I was in there.
Justifiable.
Sorry?
It's justifiable.
Justifiable, yeah, absolutely. Like going from having spent the previous 9 months traveling around Latin America, Europe, Africa, and the Caucasus to having all my freedom stripped away and essentially being in solitary confinement for 23 hours and like 55 minutes out of the day, with the exception of the 5 minutes that I could talk to the guards when they were giving me food or taking my food away. Sometimes it wouldn't even be minutes. Sometimes it would be literally like 30 seconds or less of human interaction. It's just the guy, I see him, say good evening, good morning, good afternoon. He gives me my food, gives me my water, and then 20 seconds later, he's gone.
Are you thinking about your mother? She may be calling me.
Yeah, all the time. Thinking about my mother, my grandmother. My grandmother is getting quite up there in age, so I'm thinking like, I don't know how long I'm going to be there in here. I hope it's not years that I'm stuck in here. I hope I can go back and see my grandmother again, go back and see the rest of my family again, go and see all my friends. I hope my friend down there in Sabha is okay. Like I hope nobody's mistreating him. I was thinking about my friends that I met on couch surfing in Libya. I hope none of them are being targeted by this horrible, corrupt, paranoid government because they think that they have some ties to me and whatever made up nefarious activity that they think we're getting into.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking a lot about my family. And then, like after the third day, that really did make it a bit easier being, just having a bigger space. Like you don't value space up until you have none of it and you're literally in a tiny box where you can't move around.
Was that the worst thing, or was it the unknown, not knowing what the hell is going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a combination of like the loss of freedom and not knowing what's next. So then You know, like the fourth day comes by, the fifth day comes by, sixth comes and goes, comes and goes. Nothing eventful happens. And I kind of come to the realization that these guards work in groups of four, and they work once every 4 days, at least at this specific post. So, you know, because I would always see that nice guy, Mohammed, the one who spoke English quite well, and he let me have access to the rest of the building. We ended up talking a few times afterwards, and he told me, "Oh yeah, you know, Fernando, I actually have a brother in the United States. He lives in New York." And then I was like, "Okay, wow, that actually makes perfect sense that you speak English so well now." Okay, it's very interesting. So, you know, him and I, we shared some stories about our lives with each other. And then, you know, some of the other guards, you know, we communicate in very, very broken Arabic and English, but
Yeah.
communication was not very easy with them. So then by day 10, this is my first time being allowed outside that building. And it was only for a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And I get to see that there are other people there. And then I look off into the distance and I see, you know, everybody I'd interacted with were just Arabic people. But then I see some black people there. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, interesting. So I go up to them and I talk to them. I'm like, hey, by the way, how's it going, guys? Do any of you speak English? And they look at me and they're like shocked. I'm like, oh, yeah, actually, almost all of us here speak English. Who are you? Why are you here? And then I introduce myself, and then they're like, okay, my name is Frank. I'm from Nigeria. This is Emmanuel. He's from Nigeria as well. There were some people from Ghana there, some people from Chad, from Sudan. And we got to talking, and we're like, uh, ironically enough, coincidentally enough, they were also teachers. And they had been just taken off the streets of Tripoli. And some of them had been there for like 5 months.
Oh.
And I remember, I remember very how I reacted to this news. There was this Arabic guy sweeping the floor, and at first I thought that he was a guard. And we got to talking. I hadn't seen him before, and he's like, "Oh, hey, how are you? You're new here. How's it going? What's your name? Where are you from?" And you know, I introduce myself to him. I tell him, "Oh, I'm from the U.S. I went down to Sabha, and these guys just took me from the airport." And then he's like, "Oh wow, what a coincidence! I'm from Sabha." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And then like he started acting kind of weird, and then he's like, "Hey, well, let's go and talk about it over here, though." So we moved like maybe 20 feet from the other guards, and then that's when I realized, oh wait, this guy isn't a guard; he's a prisoner in here. And he's like, "Yeah, okay. By the way, nice to meet you. My name is Saddam Hussein." I'm like, wow, okay, that's a very interesting name for a Libyan guy to have. I'm like, okay, nice to meet you. My name is Fernando. Kid you not, I still keep in touch with this guy to this day. We are friends on Instagram, and we have each other's WhatsApp numbers.
Beautiful.
So he starts telling me, yeah, like, I'm a journalist. You know, I'm also a filmmaker. I've been to the U.S. for like film conventions before, and I've worked alongside a lot of international journalists. So I was actually working on this story about the Libyan government and the migrant crisis here, and how, like, you know, how the migrants who are trying to get to Europe are treated by Libyan authorities here.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's why they snatched them off the street and they put him in jail. So he'd been there maybe like 3 weeks by the time I got there, which wasn't a very long time, but he told me later, after we had both gotten out, that he ended up spending like 3 months in that prison.
Damn.
Prison. I use the term prison loosely. It was really just an illegal, like, black site detainment facility.
Okay.
But then, you know, afterwards,
were you counting the days in your cell, and how were you doing so?
I was just counting them on my own.
Mentally,
yeah. Like, yeah, you know, when it's still in those numbers, in that range, it's easy to count.
Yeah.
Once you get into the hundreds or the thousands, then that's when you kind of lose track from what I've heard.
Oh my God.
But yeah, so afterwards, I hear him, Saddam Hussein, and one of the guys from Ghana talking, and they're speaking to each other in Arabic. And I thought I had just made a mistake in my misunderstanding, my not native understanding of the Arabic language. Mm-hmm. So the Libyan guy asked the African guy, he's like, "Hey, by the way, how long have you been here by now anyway?" And the African guy replies, "I've been here about 5 months now." And I'm like, I go up to them and I said, "Sorry, you said you've been here for 5 days, right?" And he said, no, 5 months. And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." So I just I was just in disbelief. So I just kind of put my head in my hands, and I just walked away. I didn't want to believe what I had just heard.
Yeah.
So that's when I started preparing myself. I'm like, okay, Fernando, this isn't going to be resolved in a few days. Start preparing mentally for being in here for several months to up to a year at this point.
Jesus. And I
had no idea.
How are the conditions on the other prisoners? Do you malnourished, or
they actually look okay nourished? They're not skin and bones. They look okay. Some of them some of them even had slight bellies. So we were getting fed pretty well.
Okay.
And considering we're all locked in, we're not really getting any exercise anyway. So
yeah.
The only forced labor we had to do was sweep the sand from the courtyard every once in a while.
Okay.
Because it's Libya and the country's 80% desert, so
yeah,
there's always some sweeping that needs to be done.
Okay.
So it was better to just have all of us do it than have the guards do it. And we're we're in the cells for 23 and a half hours every day anyway. We need something to do to occupy our time. I don't mind doing a little bit of forced labor.
Did you get to a point where you're like, I'm starting to get used to certain things in the cell, or were you always uncomfortable for the full 23 hours and all those things?
So there were, in the very beginning, in the first 3 weeks, I did actually exercise quite a lot. I did a lot of calisthenics. So I did push-ups, sprints, squats, sit-ups, whenever I could. And I would also use that to tire myself out. Because after a good workout, I'm sore, I went and took a shower, cold shower, and then I'm already kind of exhausted from the workout, so it'll help me sleep better. So I was using it as a double-edged sword as well.
Did you have a shower inside the cell, or was it shared?
So I was the only person in the building. So there were other jail cells there, but I had the entire building to myself.
Interesting.
So it was a bathroom with 3 toilets and 3 showers in it.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it was a shared bathroom, but there was just nobody else sharing it with me. So then, day 10 goes by, and then it's a full 10 days after that. On day 20, the deputy foreign minister of Libya comes and visits me. And they take me upstairs to one of the office rooms, the administrative rooms in this facility. And we're talking for several hours. I explained to them, there's been a big misunderstanding. I'm just a guy who likes to travel. I want to go see an oasis in the desert. That's all I wanted to do. And then they're like, okay, we understand, Mr. Fernando. Everything's going to be resolved. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. And then they put me on the phone, finally. This is day 20, with the U.S. Embassy in Tunisia, because that's the closest embassy they have now to Libya, ever since the events of 2012 and what happened there with our diplomatic mission. So we spoke for maybe 3 or 4 hours. First, it was a couple hours with the deputy foreign minister, and then a couple hours on the phone with the consular officers at the U.S. Embassy. Explained what happened, and then they're like, okay, don't worry, everything's going to be resolved. We're going to get you out of there. We give it maybe 2 or 3 days. And then the next day comes, and then Mr. Interrogator comes and interrogates me again. However, this time it's a rather short one, maybe 2 or 3 hours. And then he's being quite cordial during the second interrogation. And he just wants to know about some of the places I've been, to Sudan, my time in Iraq, my time in like Morocco, Lebanon, and then this is when I was actually impressed for the very first time by the Libyan government. Like these interrogators who were asking me questions, they asked me this very specific question that they could not have known unless they did their jobs. So they asked me like, how much time did you spend in Basra in southern Iraq? And I remember thinking in my head, oh, I was there from September to November 2019, so I was there probably about 2 months. And then these guys very cleverly asked, was it 2 months? Are you sure it wasn't about 2.5 months? And
Jesus.
then I'm like, oh, yeah, actually, now that I think about it, yeah, I think it was 2.5 months. Wow. Good job. Okay. No,
Yeah.
you've actually done your research this time. All right. Let's
So
play
what if
ball.
I was off for by 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
it was such a weird, but I still remember that to this day. It was such a weird exchange of sentences, but yeah, like he had done some digging. And then they also were talking to me about this job offer that I had in Saudi Arabia. Somehow they knew about it. They knew that I had been in contact with the school, and then that in the end I had neglected to take on the job. And then they were like, "Oh, but like, what reason? What was the reason why you didn't want to take up employment at the school?" And then I told them because I didn't want to be a mathematics teacher. I wanted to
Mm.
be an English teacher. But then they weren't buying it. They were like looking. They were like fishing for an answer, but they weren't finding one because there really was no other reason beside that.
Man, and the thing is that they're finding how you're working in schools in different places. They're
Yeah.
seeing the reason why you're traveling to different destinations, and
Mm.
they still are trying to dig.
They're still
What are they
fishing for an
looking for?
answer that they've
Yeah,
made up in their own mind.
that's dangerous, man.
Yeah,
That's
especially in
dangerous.
those societies.
Exactly, because you're assuming, and obviously that creates expectations, and
Mhm.
now you're seeing reality, and it doesn't seem correct, right? Because it doesn't connect with the dots that you already created in your mind.
Right.
So yeah, they're being really biased, man, against human beings, and their
Yeah,
lives and freedom. That's tough.
absolutely.
That's tough.
So then that is on day 21. And then I remember the words this guy says to me. It wasn't the interrogator, it was one of his assistants. And then he's like, yeah, we will give all of this information to the Laura and Pauline at the U.S. Embassy in Tunisia. And like, Mr. Fernando, don't worry, you'll be out of here in like 2 or 3 days. And then every single day I woke up, I'm like, okay, today is going to be the day. And this is around the point that I stopped exercising because I could kind of tell, okay, it's going to be over soon. Like the U.S. government knows, the Libyan government knows, it's out there in the open. Like it's not like it's some random criminal group that has me. Like the governments know. There's been official conversations had, so it's all going to be over soon. And then 14 days go by, I swear, and I was just like these 14 days in particular were just really brutal because of the expectations that I had that weren't being met. And then on day 35, eventually, we're just kind of going through the motions. Like some days I don't even go and exit the building at all. Other days, I speak to my friend Mohammed, the guy who can speak English quite well. Sometimes I speak to Saddam Hussein. Other days I'm speaking to the Africans, very brief minutes. And then, we kind of had like a little window in between our separate buildings where we could like talk to each other. So
Mm.
sometimes at night we would just have conversations with each other.
Okay.
But it was a bit uncomfortable because they would have to like open a door and like avoid the cameras, and then I would have to like climb on top of a cinder block and like speak out of the window. So we couldn't do it for very long, but like having that human interaction is important.
So actually,
Situation.
you're speaking with these folks from a distance.
Yeah.
It's not really up close. Okay.
Right.
Okay, because you said you were locked in 23 hours, sometimes 23 hours and a half.
Right.
Yeah, so I was wondering how you were able to speak to the
Right.
other.
We were just speaking through like openings in the wall,
Okay.
windows.
Damn. And none of the guards are able to hear you guys?
Nope.
Okay. Man.
Yeah. So then day 35, yeah. Nothing really significant happens except that I think it was day 40, they come and they they interrogated me one last time. And this time they were especially brutal. Like they were just like very, very aggressive with their questions. This is another really long one, like 5 hours as well. And then they're just coming up with these ridiculous accusations, and they're asking me about my time in Sudan. They're questioning me about it for like an hour, asking me about Egypt, questioning me about it for an hour, asking me names of all my friends, the streets I was in, the hotels I was in. And they're only asking me about Arabic countries. They don't care about the other 40 countries I've been to in the world. They don't care about Brazil or about Germany or France. They just want to know about Sudan, Egypt, Iraq, Morocco, Lebanon. And because they're trying to find an answer, and they think if they keep interrogating me about the Arabic countries, they're going to find their answer. But they never did.
Did you ever lose your cool during these interrogations?
A few times. Like there were a few times when I raised my voice, or I mocked them, like you're not doing your interrogation job very well, or you're asking ridiculous questions. Like, and then they're like telling me to like, all right, tell us about your time in Sudan. And the whole time I kept like adopting the measure, like I'm not going to like just reveal information to these people. So I told them like, ask me a question, and I'll answer it. But what is it that you want to know? And
get to the point,
Yeah, exactly. So then by that interrogation, they're making accusations about me meeting with British men. And then at first I said, no, I haven't met any British men. I had a British colleague who's a woman at the school, but no men. And then I kept thinking, oh, actually, like some of these Libyan guys I met were probably dual citizens. Are you referring to those British guys, like Libyan British dual nationals? And he explicitly says, no, I'm talking about the British white men that you were meeting with here in Tripoli. We know you've been meeting with them. And I was just like flabbergasted. I'm like, no, like I haven't. And they kept saying like, no, we have sources that have told us that we've been meeting with British men here in the streets of Tripoli. We trust our sources, Mr. Fernando. And then I would confront them. I'm like, okay, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence. Show me pictures of me conversing with these people. Show me the videos. And they would never produce them. And I told them, okay, who is your source? Who gave you this information? Who did you get this incorrect information from? Because they're obviously wrong, or they're misguiding you, or you're just making this all up. So those are the only times that I would lose my cool, especially when they're in that third interrogation. But then eventually I told them, like, I'm tired of this. Like, let's just resolve this. Let's get to the end goal. Like, I don't want to be in this limbo, solitary confinement nonsense anymore. Let's get to the end goal. And so they were like, okay, we're going to take you to trial. We're going to put you in front of a judge. I'm like, okay, but I want a lawyer. And they're like, don't worry, a lawyer will be provided for you. And then after that final confrontation, I never saw them again. Then on day 41, they came and they vaccinated me against my will. And they didn't even know what they were vaccinating me with. I asked them what it was, and they said, they looked at the vial, and they're like, I think it's AstraZeneca. Then they looked at it again, and they're like, no, I think actually it might be Sinovac, but I'm not really sure. I'm like, okay, wow. Very professional, guys. Anyway, so when they vaccinated me, and then on day 42, finally, after 6 weeks, they put me on the phone with my mother through the U.S. Embassy and some people from like the Ministry of the Interior in Libya and the state, like the Foreign Affairs Department came, and all that was done through them. And then I told the African guys that same night on day 42. And then I told them, like, listen, guys, they vaccinated me yesterday. And then I spoke to my parents today, my family members. So they're like, okay, awesome. That's good news. We didn't want to tell you this, but, we think this is good because it means that you might actually be getting deported. But we didn't want to upset you by this news. And I was thinking in my head, upset me, man, this is the best thing that could possibly happen. I want to get deported at this point. I don't want to spend any more time in this country that I don't need to. Deportation would actually be the ideal outcome for me right now.
And whatever happened with the school, did you like try to convince them to call the school and your boss, or that went out the window after a while?
I did keep continuing to convince them, but I was actually told this during one of my interrogations that like they made some ridiculous stuff up because I don't know if you're aware of the novel To Kill a Mockingbird and
Yes.
what it's about. It's quite heavy content, especially for a very conservative, super religious society like Libyan society is.
Yeah.
They had me teaching that book in school, and then during one of my interrogations, a couple months later, one of the things that they made up were like, "Oh, Mr. Fernando, we hear that you've been teaching inappropriate subject matter to, like fifth graders and sixth graders at this school." And I told them, like, man, I'm just doing what the curriculum instructed me to teach them. It wasn't like it was my choice to teach them about this, very adult subject matter that is in To Kill a Mockingbird. But that's what my administrators told me to do for the job. So, they did bring up the school a few times during the interrogation, but not in any kind of meaningful way. So then, day 42 comes and goes. And then in my head, I'm just finally, at peace. I've spoken to my parents. The government knows I'm going to be out of here in days at most. So then day 46 comes, and day 46 is Christmas Day, December 25th, 2021. And then this was my second to last day in Libya. So then I didn't know it at the time, of course, but it was a very special day because a lot of the guys who were in the facility were Nigerians. So a lot of them were Christians. So on that day, even a lot of the guards, like they intentionally gave us more free time out in the courtyard, in the common areas. So we were out there for a good maybe like 3 hours, maybe 4 hours on that day. And they allowed us to have our lunch together, like out in the courtyard, like sitting down, and we all prayed together. And we had like a nice little like Christmas feast, even if it was only like metaphorically. It wasn't any different than any of the other food we had any other day, but it was nice to be with everyone and not be alone, totally alone on Christmas Day.
Are you a man of faith, and how did this experience affect that, regardless if you are or not?
Well, I mean, I was praying every single day that I was in that facility. Like, there's only so much you can do within your own ability in a situation like that. It was really, for me, it was just like trying to speak my way out of it, trying to use my connections. There was nothing else I could do besides that. So, yeah, I was praying every single day, praying for some sort of salvation from this nightmare that I had found myself in. So, I feel like, that experience has changed me for the better. Like, I try to be a good person, do charitable works, help other people whenever I can now. Just, no, like not be the same kind of person that I was before. Just try to be a better human being overall. Be a nice person to everyone.
If you were able to run it back, do you live through this again, or do you regret it?
You know what? I think maybe it's too soon to tell, since it's only been about a year and 7 months since I was released.
Okay.
But I would like to think that this is a significant moment in my life.
Of course.
And maybe in the long term, I will see this as kind of like a pivoting point in my lifespan.
Yeah.
So so then on day 42, day 46, that was Christmas. Next day comes and goes. It's a very easy and chill day. Pretty much I did nothing that entire day. I ate breakfast, lunch, and then I just laid down on my back thinking trying to think as little as possible. But the thoughts that I did have were just happy thoughts. So then at around 6 p.m., they come. The guards are there. They're all happy. They have these grins on their face. And then one of them comes and offers me cigarettes. And I know I can tell immediately something's different because every other time that I'd gotten cigarettes, I would ask for them beforehand. And this is the only time where one was offered to me without me asking for it. And then after I finished it, he's like, here, have a second one. And then after a few minutes, I can kind of see like everybody's running around, kind of with a weird look on their face, but they're telling me, okay, all right, don't worry, Fernando, you're going home. There's an airplane at the airport right now waiting for you, and you're going to get on it. So, they can give me all my luggage back. At first they were telling me, okay, go take a shower real quick. And then some guys came over, like really big, tough looking guys. They're like, no, we don't have time to take a shower. You got to get in the car now. And they're like being like, all of a sudden from being super slow, everything is suddenly fast paced like that. Like within minutes, I was with my luggage. I'm frantically looking for my wallet and my passport and my phones. And they're like, Mr. Fernando, don't worry. Mr. Muhammad over there has your phones and your wallets. He has going to take care of everything. So then we go onto the car, and same thing as before, as when I entered. They put a blindfold on me, 2 guys with AK-47s, one in the front, one in the back, and then we take off and we go to the airport. It's about a 15-minute drive. When we get there, we go through the executive part of the airport, not the commercial part, and then put my bag through the scanner, and then we are on the tarmac, and there's a private jet there specifically for me.
Who sends this? The US government, or?
So I walk up the jet, and a guy there, a very nicely dressed man, introduces himself. Hello, Mr. Fernando. My name is Ibrahim, and I have been the muscle today behind getting you out of here. So don't worry, we're going to go to Cairo. We just need to get your passport stamped out, and we'll be on our way. That process took about an hour. I have no idea why. But then I'm speaking to these guys, and one of the staff members that this guy had with him starts talking to me. And he's saying, oh, by the way, you teach at the international school, right? Oh, my daughter goes there, by the way. I'm like, wow, that's what a coincidence. But considering you're here on a private jet with this government official, it does not surprise me that your daughter goes to that school.
Yeah.
And then this guy, Ibrahim, he introduced himself. He's like, oh, yeah, by the way, I'm the personal advisor to the Prime Minister of Libya. I was in Morocco this morning on a business trip, and I figured I'd come here, pick you up, and then we're going to go on another business trip to Egypt. So, and then after an hour of waiting there on the tarmac, we get on our way, and I remember the whole situation was a bit frantic because this pilot, he was making some like very jerky moves. While he was turning the airplane onto the runway, like I could feel his engines powering up, like they were trying to get out of there in as much of a hurry as possible, like just in case somebody changed their mind at the last second. Like they wanted to get out of there very quickly. So,
how interesting! They're running errands, and you were one of the errands.
Yeah. So then we get to Egypt, and then it's about a 2.5-hour flight. In Egypt, the Egyptian intelligence agency meets us on the tarmac. We do an exchange, and then I'm with the Egyptians. They stamp me into their country. I don't have to pay the visa, thankfully. They paid that for me, or they just gave it to me for free. And then they're like, okay, Mr. Fernando, that was the Libyan government. They just handed you off to us. We are the Egyptian intelligence agency, and there might be a guy from the U.S. who is our equivalent in your country coming over. And then they're like, would you like anything? Would you like a coffee? And I'm like, yeah, I'll take a black coffee right now. And then afterwards, we went to like a common area in the airport, And then an American guy in a nice sharp suit with a red tie showed up. And he was kind of just introducing himself as like a staff member of the State Department at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. And he's like, yeah, I'll be taking care of your transportation back to the U.S. and all that. And yeah, like, this is, pretty cut and dry. And then, like, I kind of just essentially what I told you over the past 2 hours, that's what I went over with him for about 2 hours. And I told him kind of a little bit of a longer version. I told you a bit of the abridged version. I left a lot of details out. But yeah, eventually we were in the airport for 12 hours, and then he gave me my boarding pass that the Bill Richardson Center had paid for, my flight from Cairo to JFK Airport in New York.
Okay.
And yeah, then on December 27th, the next day, I was in New York City. And I had my mother and two gentlemen there to greet me.
How was that?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
One of the best feelings in the world.
Yeah, that relief.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine your mom, man. You know how mothers are.
Yeah, we ended up spending almost a week in New York after that because it was Christmas vacation anyway. So
Yeah.
we're like, yeah, let's just get a hotel in New York and like decompress from this entire situation. And then after a week, we went back to Miami. And then I was at work a week after that for the same company that I'm working for now.
Okay. Everything worked out for you. And man, what a wild story. But I'm happy for you for several things. I'm happy that you never got tortured, right? Physically. Even though we can consider obviously being detained for so long torture, right? It is
a form of psychological torture for sure.
Psychological torture, right? But not physically, right? I'm happy that you were in okay conditions, right? Conditions could have been worse. But what a wild story, man. What a wild story. Somewhere in it's a failed state. Some people consider it a failed state. We notice why. You got rebels. You have this federal government that's, how you mentioned it, right? You described it as they use the federal word loosely. So you don't know really who you're dealing with. For some reason, I like the rebels more than the
yeah, I do too.
You do too? Isn't that wild? So
they're much more cordial and professional.
Yeah, but they're portrayed as the enemy, right? In international news.
Right.
Look how interesting. Look how interesting. I think we have to be really careful in criticizing certain groups, right? In certain situations in certain countries, because we don't really know what's going on. And you that went through this situation, you notice how they treated you even better. A lot more humane. How about your friends that you made in these this detention center? They're still there, how is that?
I do have all of their names. I have not been successful in finding any of the Africans, but I was successful in finding Saddam Hussein, as I stated. So, a few months after I got out, I was just one day scrolling through the Twitter post of my article. And it was also like the Libyan government also has an official Twitter page. So they were tweeting about me and all that. And then one of the comments that I read, it was like, hey, can you help my friend? Like, why is this American guy getting all this international attention? And then my friend has been in there for 3 months and we still have not heard from him. And then this was a comment that he had made maybe 2 months prior to me actually seeing the comment. So he had made it sometime in January 2022, and I think I ran into it in March 2022 last year. So then I texted him. I gave him a direct message on Twitter. I was like, wow, hey, that picture, I recognized him immediately. Hey, I was in that jail cell with your friend. Here's my phone number. Text me whenever you get a chance. Within an hour, he had texted me. And then 5 or 10 minutes after that, I received a call from a separate number. And it was Saddam Hussein video chatting with me.
Wild.
And he had just gotten released from prison like a month before that.
Wild. Wild. Man, what a wild ride, right? Would you ever go back to Libya?
I would like to consider it. Some of my friends have jokingly said that I should go and be a tour guide in Libya for some of their companies. Especially like some of my friends who are like professional travelers and they send tourists to Libya on professional trips.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, come be our tour guide for our company here. I think you have a very unique perspective and you probably know this country better than anybody else. So
Wow, bro. Wow. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. It's funny thinking about, I wonder what the hell these officials were thinking.
Yeah.
Because it seems like they were chasing their own tails.
Right.
And you were suffering inside, a jail cell. But they were like confused. They're like, why is a teacher out here? Why several passports? Why the currencies? Why the phones? I think they were just paranoid,
Of course.
Obviously maybe CIA activity or any type of foreign, agency doing their thing in our country. They've done it in other countries as well in the Middle East. So we need to know, they need to be sure that you're not that type, right? That you are not an agent or anything like that. So I get it, but damn, I feel like they were.
I get it too, but 47 days, like, come on.
Yeah, come on.
And they never apologized to me. They never attempted to compensate me in any way. And by the way, those federal government officials did actually steal things from me. My debit card was never returned to me. My credit card came back to me, cut up into several pieces. My phone charger was taken, and surprisingly, all of my cash was returned to me untouched, but they took my cards, which don't even work in Libya anyway. And then some of my toiletries have been messed with.
They probably thought it was something else. They're like, oh, this is something else disguised as a credit card, maybe. But it's funny how the rebels didn't do this to you.
I know. Once again, they treated me with much more respect and were much more chivalrous.
Interesting stuff, man. I appreciate your perspective. I'm sure other people will as well. I hope people watch the whole thing because it's really, I'm not going to say entertaining because it's just a wild ride, right? I'm in that taxi car with you in that cab. Like I could see the driver. I could see you talking to him. I could see the checkpoints. I could imagine all this, right? And it's tough, man. It's tough. It's tough, but at least you have a lot of experience, right? Traveling, and there was a lot of things that you were used to, but man, you hit that brick wall, boy. Can I ask you a question? Personal?
Yeah, of course.
Did you go to therapy for this?
I actually never did.
You never have?
And actually, I quit drinking for 5 months after this happened because after this, I just wanted to be in a clear state of mind. I didn't take any sort of antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication. Didn't take any alcohol. And I was just like stone cold turkey sober for like 5 months. That to be like the first half of last year. And, I just wanted to be in a good state of mind. And that's another reason why I went back to work immediately, because I didn't want, the last thing I wanted was to be moping around at home, drinking my sorrows away. So I wanted to go work so I could distract myself and not think about this terrible experience that happened. And I think that being so open and talking about it has helped me a lot. It's very therapeutic for me to talk about it so openly and make jokes about it and see the humorous side of it, because there are some humorous aspects to the ridiculousness of the story.
Yeah.
And like the cartoonish demeanor of some of these government officials and the guards. And I still have to this day not gone to therapy now. My mother, on the other hand, has gone to therapy because it was very traumatic for her.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah, it is actually the scariest experience of my entire life.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, nothing else comes close.
I bet. I
started watching your interview with Mitch right before we started here, but I only got about 10 or 15 minutes into it.
Okay.
But yeah, I would be interested in watching the rest of that.
Yeah. Yeah. He has an interesting story himself. So
Yeah.
yeah, I thank you so much for your time, and for sharing all of this with us.
Of course, and thank you for having me as well.
Of course, anytime, anytime. And you don't have to, right? You don't have to share this. So I thank you. I thank you. And I'm going to include the 2 articles, even though I don't respect CNN at all. I'm going to add the 2 links so people could see, that this was an international story, and, you're here with us sharing it. So I thank you and I commend you, man. Keep pushing.
Thank you, man. Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much, man. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. You have a good evening.
You too.